Welcome to this Junior Cycle for Teachers screencast. This screencast has been recorded based on our Junior Cycle for Teachers webinar series for 2017-18. The topic for this recording is Subject Learning and Assessment Review in the Junior Cycle English Learning Journey, and we hope it will be informative and helpful, supporting you and your colleagues in your work with Junior Cycle English. You may choose to view this screencast individually or with your colleagues in your English department. If working as a subject department, we hope that your engagement with the screencast will be interactive and that you will take the opportunity to pause the screencast and share your experiences around SLAR meetings with your colleagues. As part of our webinar series, encouraging dialogue is central, and so we would have invited our colleagues to participate in polls and share comments at various points throughout the webinar. As you engage with this screencast, we will have a number of check-in and reflection moments which we will highlight for you. We have also shared some relevant handouts to accompany this screencast. You can access these in the resources section of our website. We will reference these as we progress through the presentation. And so, to model best practice, we will begin by sharing our learning intentions and clarify the purpose of our learning in this screencast. In this webinar, we will explore the purpose and value of subject learning and assessment review meetings, develop an understanding of the role of the facilitator of the SLAR meeting, and consider the key aspects that take place before, during, and after a SLAR meeting. But before we proceed, let's take a moment to reflect on our current knowledge and experience of subject learning and assessment review meetings. As part of this webinar, we asked participants to share whether or not they had had the opportunity to participate in a SLAR meeting using an interactive poll. If using this screencast as a department, you may wish to pause this screencast and share your experiences with your colleagues. Our first learning intention is to outline the purpose and value of SLAR meetings. I would invite you now to take a moment to read this quotation from the Framework for Junior Cycle 2015. Here we see that one purpose of the SLAR is to develop a culture of collegiality, where we work with our department colleagues, building our confidence to make fair and consistent judgments about student learning and performance. Indeed, there are many benefits to engaging in professional dialogue with our colleagues. While developing collegiality and confidence in our judgments of assessment is central to the SLAR process, it is worth taking a moment to reflect on the subject learning element of the SLAR. By sharing examples of student work, we not only have the opportunity to share the rich learning experiences from which the work arose, but also to discuss and review our plans and the resources that we've developed in our own school context. Ultimately, by discussing and sharing the teaching and learning strategies we have used, we will be best placed to provide rich and meaningful feedback for our students. Such sharing and collegiality will enhance and develop our knowledge as teachers and benefit teaching and learning throughout the 3 years of Junior Cycle. So with this in mind, let's take a moment to look at the entire Junior Cycle learning journey. We will focus particularly on the classroom-based assessment moments in 2nd and 3rd year, and thereby where the SLAR meetings will take place. The learning journey, as illustrated here, gives an insight into how the learning outcomes and text guidelines of the Junior Cycle English specification give rise to rich and meaningful learning experiences for our students across their 3 years of learning. The CBAs and the associated SLAR meetings offer opportunities for us to capture moments of that learning and discuss them with our colleagues. It's important to acknowledge that our students' learning journey has begun in primary school, ever before they reach us in 1st year, and the Junior Cycle English specification ensures continuity in their learning. For example, we see in first year how we build on the learning that's already taken place in primary school. We take an integrated approach to teaching of English through the 3 strands of oral language, reading and writing. We focus on a subset of 22 learning outcomes that are deemed most appropriate at this stage in learning, and we're mindful of the guidelines for choosing texts for first-year students. Useful advice in relation to the learning outcomes and text guidelines is available online at www.curriculumonline.ie and of course on our website www.jct.ie. As we journey into second year then, we continue to focus on the 3 strands, but now we notice that the subset of 22 learning outcomes blooms to 39 learning outcomes. The first year learning outcomes are marked with a circle. 23 of the learning outcomes are marked with a star, and a sample of these will be assessed in the final assessment. Of course, all of this information can be found in the Junior Cycle English specification on pages 12 to 15. We also have guidelines for text choice for second and third year students, and texts are chosen from prescribed lists at this stage of the learning journey. It is at the end of second year then that we're presented with the first classroom-based assessment, the Oral Communication CBA, which is of course followed by our first SLAR meeting. We will discuss this in detail in a moment. Our students continue to engage in rich learning experiences across the 3 strands during third year. Students develop the knowledge, understanding, skills and values outlined in the 39 learning outcomes through engaging in rich learning experiences and with a wide variety of texts. And so, our students arrive at the second classroom-based assessment at the end of Term 1 in third year, when students will submit their collection of student texts for assessment. This is again followed by a SLAR meeting, where teachers will consider the awarding of descriptors to a sample of those texts and engage in discussion about subject learning. We will also return to this process in detail in a few moments. Students have another opportunity to demonstrate their learning in the assessment task at the end of Term 1 of third year. The assessment task is based on the principal objective of the collection of student texts and signifies the connection that occurs through the growing awareness of the process of writing and the student's ability to reflect on that learning. The assessment task captures and rewards students' ability to reflect on their own learning, and it creates an opportunity in the classroom where students can demonstrate how they have grown as learners, and in particular as writers. The final assessment takes place in June of third year, as our students reach the end of their junior cycle learning journey. And so we see that the SLAR process informs our learning as teachers throughout the journey. SLARs allow us to review student learning and student performance, as well as share the planning and discussion of the classroom experiences that enabled that learning. As a result, our knowledge as teachers will grow and develop over the course of the junior cycle learning journey. For each classroom-based assessment and associated SLAR meeting, guidance is given on dates. For this year, 2017-2018, a second window is available to those schools that need to undertake the collection of student text CBA and the assessment task at a later date. The second window proposed is a once-off adjustment to take account of the timeline for rollout of Teacher CPD in this particular year. It's important to note that schools must opt for one of the 2 windows for all of their students. For all information regarding key dates, please go to www.curriculumonline.ie. At the beginning of this screencast, we asked participants to share whether or not they had had an opportunity to participate in a SLAR meeting. For those of you who have, We hope you will share those experiences with your colleagues, but for those of you who have not, we hope to address any concerns you may have as we move through this screencast. We're now going to explore the key details for SLAR meetings. For instance, each SLAR meeting will take approximately 2 hours, which will be allocated to teachers by using their professional time. In fact, 22 hours per year are available from this year 2017-2018 onwards. The role of the SLAR facilitator will be shared across the department. And in order to complete the work of preparation and facilitation, 2 extra hours will be allocated to the facilitator by school management. Our second learning intention for this webinar is to develop an understanding of the role of the SLAR facilitator. This brings us to our second check-in moment of the webinar. Some of you may have already had experience of the role of SLAR facilitator. In fact, some of you may have attended JCT training for SLAR facilitators. Others may be engaging in the SLAR process for the first time. As already mentioned, the SLAR offers us an opportunity to share and learn as professionals, and meaningful professional learning is greatly aided by positive working relationships with our colleagues. Some of you may be very used to collaborating regularly. Others may be more accustomed to planning, teaching and assessing individually. In this slide, Hattie points to the value of developing collegial relationships within our departments. We are teachers supporting teachers, developing professional agency in our work. I'd invite you to take a moment to read the slide. This quotation captures the spirit of the SLAR, as it were. We're trying to develop a space where we acknowledge that we are all learning, we are trying things out, and we are tolerant of errors. Thus, the SLAR meeting is a professional learning opportunity for us as teachers. Of course, there can be some challenges within our own particular schools and contexts, and Richard reminds us of this, that members of such groups already see one another with some regularity, and may have well-developed roles, positions, and patterns of interaction that are hard to break. As a result, it can mean that ideas and practices don't get challenged. Indeed, the context we're working in is complex. There may be difficulties in rethinking some of the ideas and practices. One approach that our colleagues have found useful is to take some time to establish ways of working together, also called norm setting. Agreeing on explicit norms for meetings will allow productive and positive use of meeting time. We need to make them personally meaningful, and so our norms should be generated together. They need to be constructed from the ground up, and part of the role of the facilitator is to lead and guide this process. By explicitly agreeing and stating expectations for how we work together, we are prompting meaningful collaboration and learning in our discussions, as well as creating conditions for full participation. Whether norms have been explicitly developed, or whether they have emerged implicitly from working together, most departments will already have norms that determine how they work. On this slide, we have some of the norms that other teachers have found useful. It may be creating an agenda or a running order, or appointing a timekeeper. It may be ensuring that space and equipment is organised in advance, that all teachers participate in learning discussions, or that teachers are familiar with the features of quality and examples of student work available on curriculumonline.ie. You or your colleagues may have some other ideas or norms that you've found worked well in your school context. As we will be working collaboratively in our departments going forward, it may be helpful to agree on explicit norms with your colleagues, not just in the SLAR meeting space, but also for our department meetings. As we continue to think about the role of the SLAR facilitator, it's encouraging that Alan and Blythe point to how effective facilitation relies more on learnable skills than on the character traits or natural inclinations of those who serve as facilitators. Indeed, facilitating the SLAR is another opportunity for us as teachers to professionally develop. So at this point in the screencast, while we've been thinking about the role of the facilitator, and we will continue to do this now, it's important to note that preparing for and engaging in the SLAR needs participation from all our colleagues. So let's keep this in mind as we move forward and consider the steps we take before, during, and after the SLAR meeting. Before the SLAR, the facilitator will discuss the time and date of the SLAR meeting with the principal. They will notify the teachers of meeting time and collect samples of student work from each teacher. They will then create a running order. We will demonstrate this in more detail in a moment. They will prepare the room and necessary equipment for viewing and discussing work. During the SLAR then, the facilitator will create a safe learning environment for all participating teachers. This is an important role because it's crucial that participants feel comfortable to share both the samples of their students' work, but also to discuss the work freely in terms of the features of quality, and to express opinions in a positive and safe learning environment. One of the skills of the facilitator will be to lead and guide the discussion of the meeting, balancing rich discussions about judgments of student work, the sharing of learning experiences, and potential subject learning that might inform future planning. All the time, the facilitator will maintain focused discussions and support teachers, if possible, to reach consensus on the descriptor to be awarded for each sample. After the SLAR, a record of the discussions of the SLAR and the decisions made is compiled in a short report. Teachers may assist the facilitator in completing this report. We've shared a template for this report in the resources section of our website. You'll see that it is a very short summary of the meeting. After the SLAR, the work can be returned to students, or perhaps teachers might decide to store some samples for future reference. Maybe to share with new teachers or colleagues not in attendance, and to enhance teacher knowledge. Having taken the time to look at some of the key details regarding the SLAR and steps we need to take before, during and after a SLAR meeting, we'd invite you now to pause this screencast and take an opportunity to reflect on your experiences of SLARs to date. If you're working with your department, it may be helpful for you to discuss this and to consider both the successes and challenges for you and your colleagues. You may also like to reflect on what you would do differently next time. Let's return to the learning journey experienced by our junior cycle English students from when we meet them from primary school to the end of third year. As we know, we come to our first CBA opportunity at the end of second year. Arising from the rich learning experiences in first and second year, our students are ready to complete their oral communication CBA at the end of second year, and this will be followed by a SLAR meeting. So let's take a few moments to remind ourselves of some of the key details of the oral communication classroom-based assessment. Starting with the learning outcomes, we know that the oral communication CBA is based on learning outcomes from across the 3 strands of junior cycle English, and that there are 2 priorities here. The oral communication CBA comprises of a research element as well as the development of students' communication skills. And while this oral language competency has been developed across the 3 years, there's a specific 3-week window set aside toward the end of second year to prepare for and engage in the oral communication classroom-based assessment. Students can choose from 4 formats: a presentation, an interview, a performance, or a response to a stimulus. Students can complete their CBA individually or as a member of a group, and their oral communication CBA is accompanied by a reflection note. Examples of this template are available on www.jct.ie. As part of this webinar, we shared a copy of that template. It would be used by your students to write their reflection note for their oral communication CBA as well as for their collection of text CBA. It's important that we encourage students to engage in reflection in a critical manner, thereby learning to reflect on their own learning and developing some of the key skills of the Junior Cycle framework. Having assessed our own students' work for their CBA, using the features of quality, and awarding a provisional descriptor, teachers will then attend a SLAR meeting to review their judgments and share experiences. In order for the SLAR meeting to work effectively, it's essential that teachers are familiar with the descriptor levels and how to apply the features of quality to students' work. It's important to bear in mind that when we are assessing student work, we are assessing it in terms of a national standard in Junior Cycle English. To help us develop an appreciation of that standard and the works that students have created, the NCCA have generated examples of student work from across the country in different contexts, and these samples are available on www.curriculumonline.ie. These samples are annotated to indicate how the features of quality were applied and how the descriptor for each piece was awarded. While the primary purpose of these examples is to indicate the national standard, these pieces also offer insights into how teachers have taken an integrated approach to combining the learning outcomes with texts to create a variety of rich learning experiences for their students. Acknowledging that the CBAs are assessed in line with national standards, the samples represent the different descriptors. Once generated in classrooms across the country, each sample will then go through a quality assurance process involving members of the DES, the SEC, NCCA and JCT, as well as practicing teachers. Then, and only then, are these examples of student work published online. Once we're familiar with the standards, having engaged with the samples available on Curriculum Online, and once we're familiar with the features of quality relating to this classroom-based assessment, we are ready to assess students' work using the features of quality. When applying the features of quality to a student's work, we adopt a two-step approach. The teacher first considers whether or not the work reaches the basic threshold of in line with expectations, and we do this by considering the features of quality for yet to meet expectations. Having established that the piece has exceeded that threshold, the teacher then moves up through the features of quality and adopts a best fit, on balance approach. On balance means that the student's work identifies more with one particular band than with another. In the example on screen here, we've looked at the features of quality for in line with expectations. We feel that we should look at the above expectations features of quality. However, on balance, this piece of student work is more in line with expectations than it is above expectations, and therefore its best fit, on balance, is in line with expectations. While we will assess the student's work by applying the features of quality in real time at the moment of the oral communication CBA, we will need to record a sample of student work so that we can share these samples with our colleagues in the SLAR meeting. So the next matter we need to consider then is how to record the work. The assessment guidelines provide suggestions of suitable ways of recording, ensuring that we are compliant with our school's acceptable usage policy and child protection guidelines. I would invite you now to pause this screencast so that you have time to read this extract from the assessment guidelines regarding the recording of student work. For further support and advice on the use of recording devices, we've developed a short screencast. It is available on our website, www.jct.ie. Perhaps this presents us with a moment to pause and consider these questions about how you might choose to record your students' work, as well as considering how you might store it or share it. Storing examples of your students' work may be beneficial in terms of teacher learning, as a result of sharing teaching and learning experiences with your colleagues in your department. It is important to note, however, there is no obligation to store the recordings after the SLAR has been completed. This brings us to our next consideration. Which students' work should you record for discussion at the SLAR meeting? Because the recording of students' oral communication CBA is for SLAR purposes only, there is no obligation to record all students' work. So how do we decide which students to record? I invite you now to remind yourself of the assessment guidelines in relation to the recording of students' work. Please pause this screencast now and take a moment to read this extract from the assessment guidelines. When deciding which samples of student work to record, the assessment guidelines state that, where feasible, teachers should discuss a sample from each of the descriptors, and it is through our own professional judgment, underpinned by a good understanding of the features of quality and knowledge of our students, that we will arrive at that decision. The next consideration for teachers in preparation of the SLAR is to choose and submit samples of work for discussion. Again, where possible, each teacher should submit 4 samples of student work to the SLAR facilitator, and if possible, a sample from each descriptor. Another reason for including a sample might be because it represents an interesting, creative, or novel response from a student. Or maybe there are samples that you feel would be of interest to your colleagues. You might also consider putting forward a sample that you would like to gather colleagues' feedback on regarding the best descriptor. Once each teacher has identified their samples that they wish to share and informed the facilitator should consider these points when deciding which samples to include in the running order for the meeting. Where possible, does the department have samples from each descriptor level? Is at least one sample from every teacher included for discussion at the SLAR? And have we considered how much time it will take to share and discuss each sample? We've created a running order template to accompany this screencast. This resource might be useful for the facilitator to use in preparation for the SLAR meeting, and again, it's available in the resources section of our website. So those are the steps that we would take in preparation for the SLAR. During the SLAR meeting then, all participating teachers should consider each of the pieces of student work that are presented and engage in the process of applying the features of quality as outlined earlier in this screencast. Where possible, consensus should be reached on the descriptor that best fits each of the pieces of work. Consideration should be paid to the allocation of time for each piece in order to allow for discussion of a range of pieces from the different descriptors, and for the process of considering the features of quality to be applied correctly in each case. The facilitator will help teachers to engage in open and professional dialogue and to consider the potential learning for the department moving forward. One of the principal objectives of the SLAR process is that through professional dialogue, we will learn together. We will be in a position to provide better feedback to our students and this will ultimately lead to an improvement in their learning. Of course, as English teachers, we were the first to engage in the SLAR process, but this will become a regular occurrence, as is already happening now, as other subjects come on stream across junior cycle. Following the SLAR meeting, teachers may assist the SLAR facilitator in compiling a short, one-page report on the conversations that took place and any decisions that were made during the SLAR. This report will then be submitted to the school principal. Teachers may decide to store samples of work that they could draw on in their classroom practice moving forward. You might also decide how these will be stored at this stage in the process. Teachers will then have an opportunity to reflect on their assessment of their students' work, and where necessary, teachers may choose to make appropriate adjustments before awarding a final descriptor. Finally, teachers will then be in a position to report the descriptors to their students, either informally in class or formally through your school's reporting procedures. Of course, it's important to remember that this is a process, and as time progresses and we engage with the Oral Communication CBA process each year, our own knowledge will grow. And so, let us consider the second classroom-based assessment, the collection of student texts. Like in second year, students will continue to engage with and revisit the 3 strands with the 39 learning outcomes, and with some of their prescribed texts in third year. In this way, we are building on and consolidating the learning that's taken place over the first 2 years of junior cycle. As a result, by the time our students reach December of third year, they have had several opportunities to engage with teaching, learning, and assessment opportunities that are concerned with the development of their own collection of students' texts. It's at this point in the learning journey that the second classroom-based assessment takes place, and like in second year, this classroom-based assessment is followed by a SLAR meeting. Of course, one of the key differences is that the collection of student texts is linked to the assessment task, an assessment moment that aims to capture and reward students' ability to reflect on their own learning. So with this in mind, let's take a few moments to consider some of the key details relating to the collection of students' texts, CBA. The collection of the students' texts is based on a number of learning outcomes, and students build their collection between the start of second year and the end of term 1 in third year. In the majority of cases, therefore, the work from the collection will arise from the learning experiences created in class. Students will draft pieces, and having received feedback from their peers or from their teacher, will redraft, complete, and retain at least 4 pieces in 4 genres. Each final draft is accompanied by 1 earlier draft and a reflective note. However, for the purpose of the assessment, students will put forward their 2 best pieces. These are marked at common level by their teacher using the features of quality and the descriptors. At this stage, then, teachers will bring a sample of student work to a SLAR meeting with their colleagues. While there are some differences, the processes we engage in for assessing the collection of the student text CBA is broadly similar to the process involved in assessing the Oral Communication CBA. And similar to the Oral Communication CBA, teachers will have a number of considerations to make prior to the SLAR meeting that will follow the collection of student text CBA. The following questions may be useful in preparing for the SLAR meeting following the second classroom-based assessment. What samples will teachers submit for discussion at the SLAR? How will the facilitator identify the samples that will be discussed at the SLAR? Are teachers in the department familiar with the descriptor levels and how to apply the features of quality to students' work? How will these samples be gathered, stored, and shared? Again, it is important to note that the NCCA have a range of examples of student work for the collection of the students' texts available online, indicating how the features of quality were applied. In a similar way to how we assess student work using the features of quality during the Oral Communication CBA, we adopt a two-step approach once more. Let's recap on that process again. Firstly, we consider whether the work reaches the basic threshold of in line with expectations by considering the features of quality of yet to meet expectations. Once we establish that the piece has exceeded that threshold, the teacher then moves up through the features of quality and applies a best fit, on balance approach. Again, on balance means that the student's work identifies more with one particular band than with another. In the example we have on screen here, we've looked at the features of quality for in line with expectations. We feel that we should look at the above expectations features of quality. And as this piece displays the features of quality for above expectations, we then consider the features of quality for exceptional. However, on balance, we decide that the best fit for this piece of writing is above expectations. Of course, it is important to remember that we have different features of quality for each classroom-based assessment. As well as this, unlike the Oral Communication CBA, students will put forward two pieces of work to represent their collection of student texts. In consultation with their teacher, they will have selected their two best pieces of work. Each piece will be assessed using the two-step approach applying the features of quality that we've just outlined. However, in a situation where the pieces are awarded two different descriptors, and given that these are the students' two best pieces from their entire collection, the teacher should award the lower descriptor as being representative of the collection as a whole. The final descriptor needs to be an accurate representation of the student's work over time and not an isolated or one-off result. It should be reflective of their performance in the four pieces. Otherwise, we're really doing them a disservice by telling them that the collection is of a higher standard than it really is. JCT have developed some templates that teachers have found very useful in preparing a running order for the SLAR. These handouts accompany this screencast and are available on our website www.jct.ie. Each teacher submits samples of student work for the discussion at the SLAR. Using a template like this one can assist the facilitator in ensuring that all teachers will get to share at least one sample of their students' work. It will also help to ensure that there will be an opportunity, where possible, to discuss work that's representative of the four different descriptors. At this point, the facilitator is ready to create a running order. The running order template that you see here illustrates not just the descriptor that each of the 8 pieces we plan to discuss in the SLAR meeting was awarded, but it also shows the genre of the piece of writing, as well as the topic or title of the piece. This will provide useful background information for all teachers participating in the SLAR meeting. It also helps to ensure that we get to discuss 8 pieces of student work in the time provided, 2 pieces from each descriptor level where feasible. For instance, it may only be possible to take time in the SLAR to look at one piece from a student, to look at one genre, despite the fact that the student has submitted 2 pieces and 2 different genres for the purpose of assessment. Both of these resources can be found on our website. Having explored the key details around both classroom-based assessment and their associated SLAR meetings, we are now coming to the end of this screencast regarding subject learning and assessment review in the junior cycle learning journey. So with this in mind, let's return to some of the key messages of this screencast. Firstly, the purpose of the SLAR is twofold. Certainly, it serves as an opportunity to review how we assess student work and to ensure that the work was assessed in line with national standards. However, the SLAR also offers a meaningful opportunity to learn from and with our colleagues, to develop a professional culture that values learning conversations, to build our own confidence about our judgments of student work, and to share ideas and strategies that we've used in our teaching. It's a rich professional development opportunity. Of course, the SLAR will not only help us consider how we assess student work, but also encourage us to consider the quality of feedback that we give students to help them improve their work themselves. Furthermore, the SLAR has the potential to connect with the principles underpinning your school's self-evaluation process, because it is a collaborative and reflective practice, looking at how we teach and how our students learn. In fact, Michael Fullen tells us that the SLAR meeting has the capacity to promote purposeful peer interaction, and that student learning and achievement increases substantially when teachers work in learning communities. So let's take a moment to consider the supports that are available to us moving forward. Because teacher knowledge will grow as we develop these learning communities, we will be valuable resources to our colleagues moving forward. However, teachers can also access ongoing support from JCT online, and you will find answers to your questions in the documentation online, such as the assessment guidelines and the NCCA examples of student work and booklets. All of these are accessible at www.curriculumonline.ie. We've already made reference to the dates for the classroom-based assessments and SLARs in this screencast, but it's important to reiterate that the NCCA gives guidance annually on the latest date for completion of each classroom-based assessment, on the latest date for the award of provisional descriptors, and on the latest date for the completion of the SLAR. This year, 2017-2018, there is a second window to complete the collection of student text CBA and the associated SLAR meeting, as well as giving students an opportunity to engage in the assessment task. All relevant dates can be found on www.curriculumonline.ie. We really hope that you found this screencast useful in supporting your engagement with subject learning and assessment review meetings. This screencast is one of many supports available to teachers of English, and you can keep in touch with the most recent and relevant resources and updates on our website, www.jct.ie. You can also follow us on Twitter at JCT English or #JCEnglish. If you have any further questions regarding subject learning and assessment review meetings, please feel free to email your queries to us at info@jct.ie. On behalf of all of us here at JCT, thank you for taking the time to view this screencast.